You may have to click that agree to be recorded to continue. So as everyone's doing that, let me just welcome everyone and give you some of the ground rules for today. We've got 3 great panelists, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. I see there's 50 plus folks in the audience. So what we're going to ask everyone to do is, you can do this even live as we're going along. As you think of questions that you would like to ask either for an individual panelist or for the group, go ahead and post them using the chat function on Zoom. And then after all of our panelists have had a chance to say a little bit about their thoughts, their initial thoughts on the election, I, as the moderator, will open up the chat and kind of look at the types of questions that are there and pull some of the most common ones out and pose them to the panel and see if we can get their take on your questions. Okay, I think let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce our panel and then I'll throw it to them. Everyone's in a different order, I'm sure, on each screen that you're seeing. But we're going to go in the following order. We're first going to hear from Professor Charles Tien, and then we're going to hear from Sahil Kapoor, and then from Cornell Belcher. Charles is a professor of political science at Hunter College and also at the Graduate Center, CUNY. He is currently a co-editor of the academic journal Polity, which is the journal of the Northeastern Political Science Association. And his research interests include Congress, voting, elections, and race and ethnic politics. Sahil Kapoor is a national political reporter for NBC News. He is covering the 2020 presidential election and congressional elections. He appears regularly on MSNBC and has reported on American politics, elections, and public policy since 2009. He's previously worked for Bloomberg News, TPM Media, and Inside Washington Publishers, with beats ranging from Capitol Hill and presidential races to the White House and to the Supreme Court. He's appeared on CNN, Fox, CBS, ABC, and NPR to discuss his reporting. He has a BA in Economics and Government from Claremont McKenna College. And last but not least, we're joined by Cornell Belcher. Cornell is president of Brilliant Corners Research and Strategies. He is the author of A Black Man in the White House. He is a political contributor to NBC and MSNBC, and one of the premier strategists in national progressive politics. Cornell served as pollster for the DNC under Chairman Howard Dean, making him the first minority to lead in that role for either national party. He also served on the polling team for both groundbreaking Obama presidential campaigns in 2008 and again in 2012. Over the years, Cornell has worked with both Senate and House Democrats as a senior political advisor to the DSCC in 2002, and a special projects director for the DCCC in 2000. So thank you all. It's a distinguished panel, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. First, to give us kind of a broad overview of the types of issues that political scientists think affect elections, and to give us a little hint about what those models suggest may happen in the fall, I'm going to turn first to Professor Charles Tien. And Charles, go ahead and unmute yourself too, please.
Great. Thank you, David, for having me. It's great to be part of a wonderful panel at Baruch College. And I look forward to taking questions from the audience and then also hearing our other panelists, our other distinguished panelists as well. So David said that I was going to give an overview of congressional elections, or how political scientists see congressional elections, and identify the main factors that help us understand election outcomes. And so the title of today's panel, "Who's Winning the Battle for Congress," is appropriate for that, I think. I also do election forecasting, as David knows, and so I'm going to end the presentation with the forecast for seat change in both the House and the Senate, based on the determinants that I'll be going over. So first thing I want to do is set the stage here, if I can forward here. And so setting the stage, I'm asking the question, what's at stake? So what's at stake on November 3rd, or happening already as early voting has begun? So for Congress, it's all 435 seats for voting members. There are 35 Senate seats that are up for election as well. But more importantly, it's control of both House and Senate. And the parties that win the most seats will have control of either or both houses of Congress, which lets them help determine the agenda for our country for the next 2 years. And so in terms of party control, let's go over the simple math, right? And the simple math is that right now, Republicans have 200 seats in the House, and to control the House, which means controlling all committee assignments, controlling the floor scheduling, controlling every committee as well, you need to win 218 seats. So for the Republicans to take control, they need to pick up 17 seats this year. In the other chamber, in the Senate, Democrats now have 47 seats, and they need a net gain. They need to win 3 seats, as well as the presidency, to win control of the Senate. Because if the Senate is tied, the vice president then casts the tie-breaking vote. So if Biden were to lose the presidential race, Democrats then would need to pick up 4 seats to win control of the Senate. So, these congressional races are local races. Tip O'Neill once famously said, all politics is local. But these local races, these state races, are influenced by what's happening on the national scene, right? And so national forces do influence these races, and political scientists call these national influences the fundamentals, right? So what are the fundamentals of the election? And you can think of the fundamentals as kind of the scene, if you will, or the situation that candidates find themselves in, right? So are they running uphill, or are they running downhill, right? Is the economy doing well? Is the president seen as doing a good job? All of these things will affect state and local races. So congressional races then can be seen as referendums on the current state of the economy, a referendum on the ruling party in the White House, on Donald Trump this year. And congressional races are also influenced by what I call here the electoral calendar, right? And so congressional races in midterm years are different from congressional races in presidential election years. And the electoral calendar also determines which Senate seats are up for election. And so Senate seats are divided into 3 classes. And so 1/3 of the Senate is up for election every year. And which seats those are will have an impact on the outcome. So let's look at each of these 3 factors in turn. So for for those of you old enough to remember, and so for the college students there, right, this is probably right when, around the time you were born, the 92 election, Bill Clinton's campaign advisor, known as the Raging Cajun, James Carville famously said, right, it's the economy, stupid, right? And so he advised Clinton to focus on the economy, to talk about the economy, and to do nothing else. And so a lot of research has found that voters are economic voters, meaning that, right, if the economy is doing well, voters will reward the incumbent party. And if the economy is not doing so well, voters tend to punish the ruling party. Okay, and so that translates into winning seats or losing seats in congressional races. So if the economy is doing well, the ruling party in the White House will tend to pick up more seats than they lose. And if the economy is doing well, right, the incumbent, right, then should campaign and focus on the economy. And vice versa, right, if the economy is not doing so well, talk about something else, like Supreme Court nominations or vaccines for COVID-19. And so here's some evidence looking at elections back to 1948. These are House seat changes in the election years, in presidential election years, and looking at a measure of economic performance, which is disposable personal income, right? And so this is looking at how much money basically people have in their pockets. And if disposable personal income is up over the course of the election year, the president's party tends to win seats in those election years. And so you can also see the same pattern here holding for Senate seat change. Right, and so as the economy is doing well, the ruling party tends to pick up seats in the Senate as well as the House. It's also, right, the president. Political scientists have found that, right, evaluations of the president impact congressional races and Senate races and House races. And so if the incumbent president wins, her party tends to win seats. And if the incumbent is popular, approval ratings are high, then his party tends to pick up seats as well in both the House and Senate. Okay, and here's a little bit of evidence, right, showing this trend over the last 60 years, right? And so this is looking again at elections in presidential election years, right? This is House seat change, right? So bars going up above the zero line means that the president's party is winning seats, and bars that are going below the zero line is showing years where the president's party is losing House seats. Okay, and I've circled here 3 elections where the incumbent president actually loses. And so that's only happened 3 times in the last 70 years. And you can see, right, in 2 out of those 3 cases, the president's party ended up losing seats. Right, same pattern here. You can see essentially holds in the Senate. Okay, when the president doesn't do well in the election, when the incumbent loses, his party tends to lose seats in the Senate as well as the House. So I also said, right, these elections are referendums on the president as determined by approval ratings. And so this looks at the relationship between the president's approval rating in June of the election year, and then how well his party does in the House. And right, the upward trend there is indicating that more popular presidents tend to win more seats. And the same holds in the Senate, right? So more popular presidents as measured in June of the election year, right, tend to pick up more seats for his party or her party in the Senate. Last factor I want to touch on here is the electoral calendar. Right, and so this year there are 33 seats up for election, plus 2 seats up for special election in Arizona and Georgia. Okay, so there's a total of 35 Senate seats up for election this year. And this class was last elected in 2014, and in that year, Republicans picked up 9 seats. That was a midterm election. And so all of those numbers indicate that Republicans are going to have a harder time this year in the Senate than Democrats, right? Republicans are defending more seats, and they're defending more seats that they just won 6 years ago. So here you can see the trend again over the last 70 years. As parties have more seats up for election, they tend to lose more seats. So how does all this right, come together and work for a forecast? Right, so the fancy numbers here, you can take Professor Jones's class or Professor Weber's class. I saw Professor Weber here, and they all teach this method, right, which is essentially ordinary least squares. And so what it allows you to do is right, take a bunch of factors. So I'm taking all the factors that I just talked about, and helps you predict and see what helps you right, explain seat change. And so this is a House forecasting model. But the bottom line here is that the forecast for 2020 is a 32 seat gain for Democrats. Okay, and right, that's based on numbers of Trump's approval rating, which are low, 38% as measured in June, and the economy also doing very poorly as measured as disposable personal income. Applying the same model to the Senate, right? This is a way out forecast, and you'll hear more about the specific Senate races, I think, from the next 2 presenters. But the 2020 forecast for Senate elections is showing a 12-seat gain for Democrats. So conclusions. This is an unusual election year, to say the least. But you know, the belief in the theory of what explains congressional elections, if it holds strong, right, those theories should still work regardless of what election it is, or what election year it is, or what's going on in this particular election year, right? And so, right, the strong theories are that elections are referendums on how well the economy is doing, and that elections are also referendums on how well the incumbent party, which is Donald Trump's party, or Donald Trump, is seen as doing. So the final takeaway here is that, at least for House and Senate races, right, these forecasting models are predicting a blue wave that'll give Democrats control of the Senate with 59 seats, and then more control, stronger control of the House with a 32-seat gain, giving them 264 seats. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Charles. So in an average year, we would expect a big blue wave based on political science research, but of course, there's nothing average about this year. And as Charles noted, there's a lot of variation in each individual race across the country. So next, I want to turn to Sahil Kapoor, who's unlike most of us in this chat room here, is not living in the bubble of New York City, but has actually been out on the campaign trail and visited a lot of these places that look very different from New York City. So we'll be interested to hear what his impression from the campaign trail is. Go ahead.
So Thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Professor Jones and Baruch College for hosting this and for having us. I'm very happy to be here talking with you all, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions later. I'm happy to chat about all things 2020 in the Q&A portion. I'm sure many of you are curious about the presidential race, and I'm sure a lot of you are also curious about the Supreme Court confirmation battle that I'm also covering. Actually just got back from Capitol Hill moments ago to be tracking that. But for now, I want to run through the Senate landscape, which is one of the most important things to look out for in the remainder of this campaign and on election night. And the reason is winning the Senate majority will obviously be critical to Democrats' hopes of getting a legislative agenda passed if Joe Biden does win the presidency. If the forecasts are right and Biden does end up winning, then he is going to need a Democratic Senate to get most of his agenda through. And forecasters say the Senate may be the toughest of the three for Democrats to win, tougher than retaining the House majority, which is very much in their favor. Almost nobody seems to think, no serious people seem to think that Republicans are likely to recapture the House majority. Tougher even than winning the presidency for Democrats is winning the Senate majority. And we can get into the reasons for that later if any of you are interested. But I wanna just briefly explain what the Senate landscape looks like. Charles ran through some of these numbers, but essentially Democrats are defending 12 seats on the map. All but one of them are in favorable territory. The one unfavorable one is in Alabama, where Doug Jones won a huge upset election against a deeply flawed Republican candidate a few years ago. Republicans are defending 23 seats. 7 of them are very competitive, and another 6 of them are on the map. This is based on the nonpartisan Cook Political Report's projections. They basically rate races in terms of whether they're toss-ups, whether they're leaning in one party, or whether they're likely or solidly in one party. Of the Republican seats that are very competitive, the 2 that the Democrats have the best shot at capturing are Arizona and Colorado. Colorado is represented currently by Cory Gardner. He's a Republican who won for the first time in the 2014 Senate races. And Colorado is a state that has tilted quite considerably toward the Democrats in recent years. There are demographic changes and changes in voting patterns that have put that state pretty comfortably in the Democratic column. So Cory Gardner faces stiff headwinds. And a number of analysts, and I would probably agree with this, say that Gardner is a reasonably strong Republican campaigner, but that Colorado is enough of a blue state that he's likely to lose in any kind of a good year for Democrats. In addition, you have Arizona, which is turning out to be one of the biggest bright spots for Democrats this cycle. It has elected, in 2018, Arizona elected a Democratic senator for the first time in 30 years. I think you'd have to go back all the way to the 1950s to find more than one instance in which Democrats have, the Democratic presidential nominee has won Arizona. Right now it is represented by Martha McSally, a senator who actually lost her 2018 race, but was picked by the governor to fill a vacancy that was created by the late Senator John McCain after he died. She is making a lot of the same mistakes she made in her 2018 campaign. She's not seen as a particularly strong candidate. And changes in Arizona, specifically the Phoenix and Maricopa County metropolitan area, the suburbs of that region have moved increasingly toward Democrats, like many suburban areas around the country. And she seems to be trailing in poll after poll and seems more likely than not by the reckoning of forecasters to lose that race. Beyond that, you've got the pure toss-ups, and this is where the battle is really going to be fought. You have Georgia, where Senator David Perdue is defending his seat. You have Iowa, where Senator Joni Ernst is defending her seat. Maine, Susan Collins defending her seat. Montana, Steve Daines defending his seat against a popular Democratic governor of what is a pretty red state. Very few people had expected Montana to even be in play. And speak to Democratic strategists up there, and they say there's literally one man in that state who could make that race competitive. His name is Steve Bullock. He's the governor right now, and he happens to be running for Senate. So that race is also competitive. North Carolina, and some people have described this one as probably the ultimate bellwether for whether Republicans or Democrats retain the majority. This is a purple state that has trended more and more toward Democrats recently as a result of demographic changes, more young people there. There are a lot of people of color there. The suburbs have also moved, like in many other places around the country, toward the Democrats, largely as a result of disenchantment with President Trump. Tom Tillis is the Republican who's defending his seat there. He's a first-term senator, and he faces a very serious challenge from the Democrat Cal Cunningham. So those 5 seats are probably going to determine the balance of who wins the Senate. Now, beyond that, there are some other races that are slightly favorable to Republicans. They're not the sort of races that forecasters are ready to write off completely, because they could, in a blue wave landscape, end up tipping toward the Democrats. And that's Georgia, with the other seat, has a special election. It's run a little more in a quirky manner, which is why it's rated as slightly less competitive than the other Georgia seat. And South Carolina. Now, this is very interesting because Lindsey Graham is the senator from South Carolina defending his seat. South Carolina is a very red state. This was not expected to be competitive, but polls in the last 2 months, 4 different polls in the last 2 months have shown this to be a dead heat. Statistical tie between Lindsey Graham and his Democratic opponent, Jamie Harrison, who's run a better than expected campaign. Lindsey Graham is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He's going to be holding the Supreme Court confirmation hearings for President Trump's nominee, which we expect to be announced on Saturday. He's had quite a journey, I should say, to put it mildly, in terms of his attitude toward President Trump. He was a fierce opponent in the 2016 cycle. He said all kinds of enormously critical things. And now he's become one of President Trump's strongest supporters, a golf buddy, frequently on the weekends, and really one of his staunchest allies in the Senate. So keep an eye on him. That could be one of the biggest surprises of this cycle for Democrats, if they are able to flip that seat. It would also be something that they would personally treasure, given that they would be knocking off a chairman of a major Senate committee, which is highly unusual. So there you have it. That's the Senate landscape for the most part. The 538 forecast, which I recommend to everyone to check out. They do a very good job tracking these things. They say Democrats are slightly favored to win the Senate, not heavily favored. If they run the numbers in an algorithm, then they expect Democrats to end up with 50.7 seats. You can't have 0.7 seats, but that just shows you how competitive it is. And Democrats need, if they win the presidency, they need a net gain of 3 seats to capture the Senate majority, in which case it would be a 50-50 tie, and the vice president would break the tie. And they need 4 seats to capture an outright majority. No matter who wins the presidency, they would be controlling the chamber. Now, the Supreme Court battle is a really interesting indication, I would say, and we've only seen this over the last 5 or 6 days since the late Justice Ginsburg passed on Friday, of how Republicans are handling their races. And there are a couple of really fascinating contrasts, I would say. There's Susan Collins in Maine, who is the only Republican senator facing voters this year who has come out and said, I do not support moving a nominee. In other words, I do not support the Senate voting on a nominee this year before the election, and the winner of the presidential election should pick the justice. Now, this was Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader's standard in 2016. Justice Scalia, a conservative icon, died in February of 2016, and Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, said there will be no vote on a Supreme Court replacement by President Obama, picked by President Obama that year, that the winner of that presidential election in 9 months should make that. Now we are about 45 days from the election, and it happens to be a Republican president who is positioned to pick a conservative justice for that seat. Mitch McConnell has a different view this time. He would like to fill that seat, cement a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. He will argue that the situation is different because there was an opposite party controlling the Senate and the White House at the time, versus now it's the same party. I'll leave it up to everyone to make up their minds as to where they come down on that. But the bottom line is Susan Collins is the only one who's backed away from the party line, and this reflects the way she is running her campaign. She's trying to separate herself from President Trump and run as kind of a nonpartisan and independent maverick senator who is not afraid to cross party lines. She has done that successfully in the past. She has won her elections in Maine, which happens to be a blue state, by huge margins. in 2014 and in the very competitive and the very difficult year of 2008 when Democrats had a good year, she still won in Maine. On the other hand, you have senators like Cory Gardner and Joni Ernst, who also face serious headwinds in their states, who are endangered, but they're sticking with the party line. And that gets to this contrast that I want to talk about, that some Republican senators have decided that their political prospects are going to live or die on the basis of how President Trump does in their states. Cory Gardner has concluded that he cannot back away from President Trump, that he will lose his own voters, that he will lose President Trump's voters in the Senate election and potentially lose his path to getting reelected. At the same time, he is pushing off independents who don't support President Trump and who want to see a more independent-minded, less partisan senator in Colorado. Pretty much the same case in Joni Ernst. And the last contrast here that I'll point out is there's a certain number of senators who have decided to lean in aggressively and fight on behalf of President Trump in the hope of shaking up their race, and that's Tom Tillis. Within 24 hours of Justice Ginsburg's passing, Tom Tillis came out with a statement and said, this election is going to be a referendum on what kind of Supreme Court North Carolinians want. Do they want, in his view, a left-wing Supreme Court? He says, pick judges that would legislate from the bench, or a conservative Supreme Court that President Trump could cement at this moment with a 6-3 majority. So he too is betting that a strong turnout from President Trump's voters will save him, even as he's alienating many independent and suburban voters in North Carolina who could frankly be his undoing. I think that covers it. The only other thing I'd point out is that if, other than the seat of Alabama, if Republicans have any shot at flipping a seat, it would be that of Gary Peters, a Democratic senator in Michigan. I don't think this is likely. The polls favor Peters. Michigan is trending Democrat this year compared to 2016, when President Trump won a massive upset there by a very, very narrow margin. But given the importance of the state and given the fact that it supported President Trump last time, I think people are being cautious and not wanting to write that state off. So really one good opportunity for Republicans, one long shot opportunities for Republicans to pick up seats on net, but lots of opportunities for Democrats to pick up seats. So you'd probably rather be them than the Republicans at this point in terms of who's likely to win a Senate majority, but this could be very, very competitive. You can see a scenario where Joe Biden wins the presidency and Democrats easily retain their House majority, but the Senate comes down to perhaps a single seat or two, and it really could go the other way. It's not guaranteed just because potentially Joe Biden wins the presidency and Democrats keep the House that they also win the Senate. So keep an eye on this one.
Thank you very much, Sahil. And that was a great detailed picture of the status of the Senate race. Before I introduce our last speaker, Cornell Belcher, or hand it off to him, I just want to remind everyone, we're going to have a Q&A session right after Cornell speaks. And the way we're going to handle it is we're inviting you. You can go ahead right now and start typing in any questions that you have for our panelists into the chat function here on Zoom. And I will be drawing from that list and throwing those questions to the panelists. I should also mention two other things. One is that we have panelists who are very busy, and Cornell's informed me he has another meeting coming up, so he may have to leave close to 6:30. So if you have questions for Cornell, make that clear, and I'll try to get to those first. And then finally, another quick announcement. This is the first of a series of campaign 2020 election events here at Baruch. And if you look at the top of the chat, you'll see a link to the entire list. And the first one is coming up. It's the first presidential debate in a Debate Watch event on the 29th, in which we'll have Baruch faculty available to discuss and do Q&A after the first presidential debate. So if you want to check that out, click the link at the top of the chat. Okay, so without further ado, what we're missing now is we're missing an inside perspective of what are the campaigns thinking in this environment we're in, and how are they perceiving, and what kind of strategies are they utilizing in this unique 2020 environment.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and especially be part of such a distinguished panel. And I'm going to touch on a little bit of what Professor Tien and Kapur have touched on, and I'm going to step back from a campaign perspective, and not sort of not be partisan here, although I'm a partisan political hack. I'm not going to be partisan here. The DCCC, which is the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which is the national arm for House Democrats, their chairwoman has almost 100 seats on her target map. That is an incredible amount of seats. And someone who once upon a time worked at the DCCC, once when we were trying to make Dick Gephardt speaker, a lot of your students have no idea who Dick Gephardt is. We had maybe 25, and that was a really good year. But it talks about the expansiveness of the playing field and the map. And one of the things in campaigns is in politics is you always want to be expanding the playing field. And I work for a guy named Howard Dean who came up with this. It now seems common sense, but at the time it was really quite controversial. This ideal that of a 50-state strategy where we're going to actually compete everywhere, right? And we're gonna try to go on offense across the country and make investments and go across the country and compete everywhere. The landscape going into 2020 is unlike anything I've ever seen before from a campaign perspective, and that you do have so many seats that are legitimately, as my two fellow panelists talked about, that are legitimately open up and are competitive. And I can tell you, we're seeing seats all across the country and coming in as really toss-up seats, and particularly in Republican areas. Now, from a campaign standpoint, and this also is true sort of on the presidential level. Look, Arizona, in 2008 on the Obama campaign, we spent a lot of resources out west, and states like Nevada and Colorado were beginning to sort of move towards the blue, and now they're more blue than not. I think Arizona is a state that you're seeing that way out west, but also don't forget what's happening in the South. Right now, there is not a lot of traditional blue places, blue states where Republicans are making real inroads. And long term, that you have to think that's probably, if I'm sitting over at the RNC or the Republican Senate Campaign Committee, I'm looking at this map at how red state after red state after red state, Democrats are making inroads. If you were to say 5 months ago, Dave, that we would have a serious conversation about the Senate flipping, I'd say no one is seriously talking about the Senate flipping 5-6 months ago. Now we are. And it does touch on something that Professor Tien is saying, and it is an absolute referendum on the Trump presidency. And if you look at 2018, and you look across the battleground states, most of the battleground states, the Republican incumbent struggled to get above where Trump's job approval was. And you look at places like Georgia. And again, I'm a Southerner, so I can beat up on the South. But if you look at places like that, the ideal that we are competitive in 2 Senate seats in Georgia, that's startling. And then you go to North Carolina, where it is a purplish state, but again, it's been red a lot longer than it's been purplish. And I think there's a good chance for Democrats to do well there also. And look, the Biden campaign is spending money there, which also helps from a campaign perspective. If the presidential is spending money there, that helps down the down tickets. So in places like Arizona, where the presidential is spending, that helps. Places like Georgia, and I was on the Obama campaign, and we raised a lot of money, but we didn't have the kind of resources these cats have. They're spending money in Georgia. like real money in Georgia. They might be spending money in Texas. In Texas, it is a playing field unlike I've ever seen before, and the solid Republican South is beginning to shake and crack a little bit. You talk about that Senate race in South Carolina. Well, I'm the pollster for Jamie Harrison. That's a toss-up race, and again, and Jamie Harrison has made investments there. And if you look at and this is the dirty little secret for all your students, we really do need campaign finance reform, because the amount of money in American politics is just disgusting. It really is. And I say that as someone who benefits from money being in politics. I'm going to take Dave to probably the dinner at some point after the election, and I'm going to spend some of the money I made in American politics. But the amounts of money that they're raking in, like, 20, 30, $40 million for a Senate seat. Are you kidding me? But that's kind of money that's being raised. So you have the opportunity also to compete in some of these places that we haven't been able to compete for. One of the reasons why, Jamie Harrison is doing so well is, one, he's a great candidate. Two, Lindsey Graham is vulnerable. And the demographic changes that you're seeing happening out west, they're also happening throughout the South, with both growing more diverse, but apparently the Sun Belt is some places where you Northerners also want to go and retire. So we're seeing a lot of these races open up and be competitive for Democrats. So 6 or 7 months ago, I would have said, I don't think anyone's seriously thinking about the Senate flipping, but now I think there's a better than 50-50 chance that we're actually going to flip the Senate, because as a campaign, especially from the national perspective, the more seats you can put in play, the better off you are. And Democrats right now are putting seats in play that we haven't put in play in a good long time. The other piece before I stop yabbering is this, and something that Kapur touched on, and it is, and I think this is important because, and Dave, I think we might be looking at another party realignment. And I don't say that lightly. But if you look at the way college-educated white voters, particularly college-educated white women, are voting right now, are behaving right now politically, we haven't seen something like this in a long time. And the shifts that are happening because of college white women putting the suburbs in more play. In fact, in some ways, shifting the suburbs to blue. I mean, go to Pennsylvania, look at the suburbs around Philadelphia. What's happened there in the last, 2-3 years is amazing. And these college white women, in almost every poll, in almost every race we're doing, they are a target group for both sort of expanding the turnout, but driving up the gender gap here. And I think, look, the guy I work for, Barack Obama, didn't win college white voters, and according to the exit poll, Hillary Clinton, narrowly lost college white voters. Democrats are now winning college white voters. That's something that hasn't happened in a very long time. So I think we might be looking at a realignment of the parties. But I also want to end on this note, is that, I love, and Professor Tien sort of touched on this, I love James Carville, and we all in politics love James Carville, and the idea that it's the economy stupid has rung true for a long time. But this ain't about the economy stupid. It's not. When you look at the way, especially some of the voters who are the most upwardly mobile are turning away from Trumpism, it's not about the economy. When you look at 2018 and how we won seats, that the Democrats won seats that frankly I don't even understand how they won. And I think last count there was Democrats raked up the largest raw number vote margin, I think, in decades. That wasn't about the economy. That was about something more fundamental about what Americans were. That was about the racism and the division and the sexism and a lot of the other isms when you look at how women turned out and voted, some of our conventional metrics don't hold anymore right now, and for where we're going in this country. And the last piece that I will leave you with is this: we're talking a lot about sort of the elections and the election outcomes. You were all assuming that we're going to have an election outcome, because we do have a commander-in-chief who, as of now, has not said that he will peacefully leave the White House, which is another moment of a unique moment that we've never been at in American politics. So I'll just say that a lot of the variables that we've used to measure, politics with historically, some of those measures just don't work anymore, because in a lot of ways we're in uncharted territory in American politics now. So I'll stop yabbering there and throw it back to you, Dave. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And as I said, I know you're busy. We're right in the middle of the busiest season of the year for you. So thank you for being here. And if you don't mind, since you're going to have to leave, maybe I'll throw the first question to you, and you can depart as you need to. One of the folks in our audience, and please keep the questions coming in the chat, asks about the fact that you've given a relatively rosy picture of the landscape for Democrats. A lot of Democrats are nervous when they see what they view as splintering of the Democratic Party, that the left and the sort of mainstream wing of the party don't seem to be getting along very well. What's your view of that kind of left moderates division in the party?
I think there's been more. I think there's been more made of that in the media than in the real world. I do. When you look at, Biden is running. Biden's advantage in the polling is structurally different than even what that Barack Obama. And Barack Obama, won back-to-back majorities, which you got to go a long way to see a Democrat or anyone, quite frankly, win back-to-back majorities in this country. He won back-to-back majorities. Structurally, what Biden's advantages are structurally different and better. So underneath the surface, there may be some grumblings about Biden not being, progressive enough, but I think when you look at his support levels, it's hard to argue that he's suffering or lagging because liberals aren't on board. Liberals understand that Donald Trump is an existential threat to everything that they believe in. So I think they're on board. One point I will go about the rosiness of the election and is this. I actually, I'm not that rosy about the election. I think the Democrats have a lot of advantages, and we're expanding the playing field in a lot of ways. But I'm going to say this, and that is that what Trump and look, I'm not going to pretend that that is what it's not. Look, when we all know what Trump is doing, he is a Southern strategy 2.0. It is classic Southern strategy, and is telling suburban women that they're going to come and destroy your neighborhoods, and the law and order stuff. I mean, it's right out of Nixon's playbook. What I think we all understand, and especially you in the academic life, is that strategy has worked more than it has failed in American politics. And the ideal and the ideal that they're crazy like foxes, doubling down on all this law and order talk and all this talk about how those people are going to come get you and they're going to destroy your suburbs. That is basically a Southern strategy being rebooted. And I am optimistic about the future, but I'm also understanding of the past. And that is a strategy that has historically worked and helped. People have won with the Southern strategy more than they've lost with the Southern strategy. So keep an eye on the polls and the sort of the turmoil and the volatility of the electorate, and one side tries to play that up, and we will see if this structural leads hold under the pressure and the volatility of that division and the Southern strategy. So I am optimistic, but I am cautious.
Thank you. I see a question for Professor Tien, and might be a student here noticed that with the forecasting, you use numbers, and this is fairly typical, this is not just you, that come from July to do the forecast. But of course, in this day and age, a few days or a week is like a lifetime of different things going on. So what factors do you think that, from the snapshot in July might sort of change what that forecast means? What events might have sort of shifted it one way or another since then?
Sure, thanks for that question. So one of the challenges of forecasting, I guess, is when do you make the forecast, right? And so we could wait up till the day before the election and take the poll numbers from then and make a forecast, or we could try to develop a better understanding of elections and voter behavior, right, using these forecast models. A lot of investigating has gone into picking June or July in terms of what best predicts the outcome. And so that's not to say that campaigns don't matter and that events don't matter, but right, a lot of what's baked into that election year is baked in July, and you could argue that during the course of the campaign, people may, a few percentages of people may move one way or the other, but by election day they come back to their right, to their foundational underpinnings in terms of party preferences. Those events matter, but the other way to think of it also is that you have two candidates that have gone through a long process of vetting, right? Either they've won a presidential election campaign or they've survived a primary campaign, and so they're both very strong campaigners, and right, the advantage that one may have over the other is kind of played out by the fact that right, they're both very strong.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to throw the next question to Sahil, who talked a little bit about the Supreme Court and that possibly shaking up the race. One of the questions from our audience is about evangelical Christians, the fact that they're heavily one of the groups that supports Trump the strongest of almost any of his demographic groups. And how does that maybe play into what's going to, whether are we going to see the numbers change now with the Supreme Court in play?
It's doubtful we'll see the numbers change. Evangelical Christians are a very motivated bunch. They supported President Trump by a margin of roughly 80-20 in 2016, which surprised a lot of people, who thought someone with Trump's behavior, multiple divorces, someone who swears all the time, are evangelical Christians going to get behind him? The answer is emphatically yes. And there are many reasons for that. And one of them is the fact that he promised to pick conservative judges who hold views against same-sex marriage, who oppose abortion rights. And the big white whale of the evangelical movement has been overturning Roe versus Wade. Conservatives are closer to doing that than they have been at any point in my lifetime, and probably the lifetime of most people watching this right now. With this new judge, they could cement a 6-3 majority of Republican appointees, and many of these were vetted by, vetted by conservatives who strongly believe that Roe was improperly decided and should go. Now, how this affects the election is unclear. It is safe to say, based on the data, that in the last several decades worth of elections, conservatives have been more motivated by the courts. There's a muscle memory there. When they go to the ballot box, they make the connection between, I'm electing this president, they're going to pick these conservative judges, and they're going to have, we're going to get these policy results out of it. Democrats don't have that. Democrats have not spoken to their base about the importance of the court in the way that conservatives have. Democrats haven't built a vernacular that causes their voters to connect casting their ballots with certain kind of judges and certain kind of policy outcomes. And Democrats are paying a massive price for it. This 6-3 majority could hinder progressive goals for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, depending on who retires when. But this time, for the first time in many decades, we are seeing that Democrats are, in surveys, more motivated, more energized about the courts. And we were seeing this even before Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, because the fact that she has been battling cancer for the last 3 months, a recurrence of pancreatic cancer, the fact that she was 87, many people knew that her days on the court were numbered. And I think the thought of losing her, especially to a conservative justice, was very motivating for Democratic voters. So I think the dynamic could flip this time, in that Democrats could be more motivated to turn out and to cast their ballots as a result of the Supreme Court. And all it took was the leader of the liberal wing, one of the biggest icons in Supreme Court history, the notorious RBG, dying and potentially being replaced by a conservative who could begin to unravel her legacy. So we could see a real paradigm shift as a result of the Supreme Court this time.
Fascinating.
David, I want to jump in here on.
Yes, please.
Underline something Sahil was talking about here, because this is really, really important, and I think it is a fascinating time we're in. But he's spot on and I view this as like the dog that's chasing the racing car down the street. What the hell do you do when you catch it? I got to tell you, there is no mandate. There is no strong will for Roe v. Wade being overturned in this country. And the ideal that they may put another judge on that's going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Look, I've said this before. I said this, on Sahil and I's network, NBC, on Meet the Press, is choice is not a voting issue really a strong voting issue for these suburban women until it needs to be. And you let the Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade, and all hell's going to break out in this country. Because women voters, there's no, the vast majority of women voters is not something that they want to have happen. And I think that is something that could really change the political landscape dramatically if there's a real threat, that suburban white women start feeling a real threat that them and their daughters are going to lose their reproductive rights. So be careful what you ask for here on this conservatives with this court.
And it fits in with what you were saying about the realignment. That could be another push in that same direction among similar voters. Maybe I'll throw it back to you in case we lose you. I see another question that's kind of a campaign side question. Should the Democrats be spending their money in states where they already think they're going to win in order to cement them, or should they be expanding the map into kind of purplish, reddish states?
Well, I was going to be a smart ass and say, I wonder what the Hillary Clinton campaign would say about it.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be a smart ass on your thing here, Dave. The answer is, okay, so here's the dirty secret, is that you don't have infinite dollars. And in 2000, I'll give you a great example. In 2012, on the Obama campaign, I was saying, I'm telling you guys, we can make Georgia competitive. You should, let's try. And right, fine, Cornell, do a couple polls and come back. And I did a couple polls in Georgia, and we were within 5 points in Georgia. And I made the case that I'm telling you, we can do something in Georgia. This is a state we should put this state in play. Say, okay, Cornell, we'll listen to you. Let's run the numbers. And then you run the numbers, and what you find out is putting a state like Georgia in play is not a cheap thing. You're talking about, do you have another $60 million? And if I'm going to take money to put Georgia in play, does that then mean I'm taking money out of Nevada? Am I taking money out of New Hampshire? Am I taking money out of Michigan? So these are for inside the campaigns, the campaign managers, the campaign team, we have on boards an understanding of what our fundraising projections are and what we can actually afford given those fundraising projections. And so you have to balance strategically how much you go on the offense and how much you play how much you play defense. For example, the ideal that Democrats, we've been hearing Democrats going to make Texas competitive for years. The problem is Texas is a country, and to sort of put the kind of resources into, it would suck up so much of the Biden campaign resources if they would made a serious hard play at Texas. Now they'll say, we're trying to play in more places, but to make a serious play in Texas, that would suck up the resources of 3 or 4 other states. I mean, so all of a sudden you're going to say you're not going to play, you're going to suck away resources in Michigan, Wisconsin, and maybe Pennsylvania to play in Texas. I mean, Florida itself is a country. I mean, and it's really expensive. So these are the kind of upsides and downsides that you have to contend with when you're dealing with campaigns. I think there's some states out there that Democrats could make more competitive. I think Texas is one that's trending that way, but the campaign reality is you begin to sort of run out of money.
Can I just add to that, David? So as far as I've my conversations with the Biden campaign and trying to understand how they think about this go, they have a couple of different considerations. The first is they don't want to put all their eggs in the upper Midwest basket in the states Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Probably the 3 most important, the 3 most narrowly decided. And if Biden wins those states, along with the other states that Hillary Clinton won in 2016, which is widely expected, he is president. He doesn't need any other state. Now, does the Biden campaign simply put all their resources there? That's a really tough bet to make, right? Because what if they end up losing Wisconsin? Then he loses the presidency. So they have to invest in Arizona, which is trending their way. What if that doesn't work out? They have to invest in perhaps North Carolina, which is also trending their way. Florida, which is always competitive, which is always a weird, quirky state, unpredictable, even in wave years sometimes. They're investing there because that's a big36 The other consideration is where the Senate races are. Joe Biden served in the Senate for, what was it, 36 years before he became vice president. He knows the importance of having a Senate majority and having Chuck Schumer, the New York Democrat, run the place, as opposed to Mitch McConnell, the Kentucky Republican, run the place. So that's one of the reasons that he's putting some efforts in Georgia, where there are 2 Senate seats on the map. One of the reasons where he's putting quite a bit of effort in North Carolina and Iowa, 2 states he doesn't need because there are Senate races up for grabs. So you have to look at the whole picture. And the only thing I will say, and far be it from me to give advice, I'm just a reporter, is that Ohio is trending red. And it seems like a waste of time for Democrats to keep investing there. And I get a lot of Ohio Democrats come after me and say snarky things to me on Twitter about this, but the reason is President Trump won Ohio by 8 points. It has a very large share of white voters who didn't go to college, which is precisely the heart of President Trump's base. And if you run the numbers, this would be the Democrats' 350th electoral vote. Now talk about throwing money away. They don't need that. So there are some states that seemingly were competitive in the past. Ohio's got an amazing winning streak of picking the president going all the way back to 1964, but it's no longer a bellwether state. So there are states that used to be competitive that are no longer really competitive, and there's less of an incentive to invest in.
Thank you. So another theme that's sprinkled throughout the audience questions and surprisingly hasn't dominated our discussion yet is, or at least directly, we've had some indirect references, is the impact of COVID. And I think some people are thinking about turnout, and turnout is so important for Democrats, and there's also the issue of the president kind of saying people shouldn't vote by mail-in, but then his party wants that in Florida. So there's all kinds of questions, you know, and Cornell has told us he's trying to guess who's going to turn out in some of these models. So what do we think that COVID is what kind of an effect is it going to have on the level of turnout and who turns out?
I'll start off before I throw it to my panelists. What I'm actually seeing in data is there is a level of concern about voting, about showing up and voting, especially among Democrats, that in the time of COVID, and so there was a big push for mail ballots, and of course, as you know, the president is working very hard to sort of undermine the credibility of that, and it's working, by the way. So what we're also picking up in data is that an amazing amount of voters are suspicious or skeptical that their mail-in ballot will even be counted. And so now campaigns. So now we're at the point where I think Axios sort of one of the media outlets reported on this, I think today or yesterday, about how campaigns are now, and certainly ones I'm working on are now, and it's what Michelle Obama says, have a plan to vote. But we're now pushing people to vote in person, but vote in person early. Because there is such a suspicion about the mail-in ballots, and there's such concern about the election day is going to be a complete debacle, and you might catch COVID and die. The other part about COVID is this. A lot of our resources that we campaigns set aside for GOTV, and I'm going to apologize to anyone who's living in a battleground state now, because you're going to be inundated with campaign television commercials and digital ads, because they don't have any place to put that GOTV money, because at least on the Democratic side, we're not really doing GOTV.
GOTV is get out the vote, just for folks who don't know.
So the ground operations that a lot of big ground operations that campaigns traditionally do, at least on the Democratic side, we're not currently engaged in those. Now, Republicans are beginning to do some of that, but on the Democratic side, you know, and let's go to a state like South Carolina, which Kapur brought up earlier. That's a state where it actually hurts us that we cannot do big ground operations, because part of what we have to do is bring in new voters and bring in voters in South Carolina who've not been a part of the process. The best way to do that is out in the community. The best way to do that is neighbor-to-neighbor programs. The best way to do that is on the ground. And right now, we can't do that because of COVID.
Thank you. We have some questions that are kind of leaking into not just campaign stuff, but some of the downstream consequences. For example, Cornell mentioned how we really need campaign finance reform, and someone asks, how likely is that to happen? There's other talk about, you know, the Electoral College and whether that needs to be reformed, whether the Supreme Court should be packed, whether the filibuster should be removed. So all of these are kind of moving into other territory that I know Sahil and Charles are interested in talking about. Do you guys want to grab one of those questions and speak to it a little bit?
I'm happy to take the campaign finance question first. The answer is there are minor steps that a Congress run by Democrats can take on campaign finance. If Republicans retain control of either the House or the Senate or the Senate or the White House, or have any chamber of government, they will block it. They don't want new campaign finance restrictions. If Democrats get the trifecta, they could pass modest legislation such as requiring the disclosure of donors to super PACs and these entities, some of which don't have to disclose their donors. In terms of big picture stuff, it would take a major reversal now on the Supreme Court. You would have to get essentially a 5-4 liberal majority back at least, which now will require multiple seats flipping to create a precedent where Democrats can, regulate in a way that Citizens United, the ruling in 2010, prohibited. So I think the prospects for campaign finance reform are pretty dim. In terms of electoral college reform, this is kind of a long-term goal that progressive activists are talking about more and more. It would almost certainly require a constitutional amendment, and you can imagine how excited Republicans are, given that the Electoral College helps them. That one has even less likelihood, I would say, of happening anytime in the foreseeable future.
Charles?
Sure. Yeah. About the Electoral College, I agree with Sahil that it probably won't happen, given that Republicans benefit. But in terms of a normative question, should it happen? Yes. If you believe in democracy and democratic outcomes, where the candidate that wins the most votes wins the election, then the Electoral College needs to be reformed. The Senate needs to be reformed or even abolished. These are things that are fun to talk about, I guess, but in terms of them actually happening, it's almost inconceivable that they would in the near future, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I would have to agree. There's an interesting article recently in Vox about how the country's being run by minority rule now. They pointed out not only do we have a president who lost the popular vote, but also the Senate seats held by Republicans now that give them their majority only something like that. I'm curious if anyone on the panel wants to try to game out what's going to happen on election day, assuming that Cornell is correct, that we're not going to know officially who the winner is on election night. And with our president recently declaring that he might not accept the results of an election, does anyone have any guesses as to how that's going to play out?
Could I just say that, David, if it's a clear Biden victory, there's nothing President Trump can do. This is not to downplay the severity or the potential, dangers of a president trying to sow discord and delegitimize the results of an election. But the military has already weighed in and said they're not going to play a part in kind of adjudicating the result. They're not going to stand guard outside the White House, and prevent Joe Biden from coming in. President Trump is leaving the White House if he loses, clearly. The one scenario where things could get very chaotic is if it's an extremely close Bush v. Gore style election of 2000. I don't know how many people on the panel are old to remember that, but if it's really that close, if it comes down to a few hundred votes or even a few thousand votes, and it's close and there's a lot of litigation, things could get very messy because President Trump has indicated that he does not want to concede the results of the election and that he will look for reasons to kind of challenge the legitimacy of ballots. So the short answer is, if it's close, things could get very messy. If it's a decisive Biden victory, and I think those are the only two real options, either a clear Biden victory or something close that could go either way, then we'll see.
Cornell, how much does it matter on this question that the Democrats hold the governorships in some of these key battleground states? Is that, can the governor just say, I certify these results as soon as the Biden's ahead? And is that an advantage like it was in Florida in 2000 for Bush?
I'm not sure who on the panel's a lawyer, but I don't think that's quite how it works. I think, to Kapur's point, I think there's been some reporting that part of the strategy of the Trump campaign is why they have all these lawyers is a legal strategy to try to hold up the process as long as possible till it gets to the point where there's and God, I don't remember my government class, but there's a date where the elections have to be certified in these states. And if they're not certified, well, then you throw it to the legislative branches, and many of these state legislative branches are Republican. Thank you, gerrymandering. But this is all. I mean, this is all sort of terrible. But however, at that point, this country's going to be in flames. I mean, we're not going to have another president of the 46% in this country. I mean, I think all of this is. Well, this other thing, I throw to my panelists, but I also throw to the people watching is this: we pretend that America can't be a failed democracy. We could be a failed democracy in a couple of months.
Sure, I would say we already are a failed democracy, living in a failed state. But I do believe you're right that the Electoral College has to meet according to the Constitution. And if there aren't enough Electoral College votes for one of the two candidates, then the House gets to decide immediately, and that's each state getting one vote. And I believe right now, I just saw an article today that if you count who would control each state, Republicans would have a control of more states, even though they have fewer total number of seats. So you can have Trump winning the election after the Electoral College failing to give one candidate or the other majority, because then the Constitution says that the House will pick the winner. And then, yes, the country probably will be in flames.
Yes, the country will be in flames.
Well, I'm hoping not to end on that scary note. So let's see if we can find a softer question here. Here's kind of a more technical question about polling. Maybe Cornell wants to speak to it. Bin Chen asks, a lot of states are decided not just by the overall polling in the state, but key counties. Does polling typically penetrate down and give you a county level view? And how does that sort of affect campaign strategy?
It depends on the race. I mean, if you're doing Senate races, what we want to do, and look, we do a lot of the work from the voter file, and we are looking at voters with a history, of likely voters, is people who have a pattern of voting, and yeah, I mean, we get a representative sample. If you're doing a statewide race, you get a representative sample that's pulled from all those counties. Now, can you look at all those counties individually? No, because then you'd need a huge sample size. And the truth of the matter is, polling isn't cheap, and it's not getting cheaper because it's getting more difficult to get people on their devices. So you can't have these massive poll samples. Typically, for a statewide Senate poll, the sample size is going to be anywhere from 800 to 1,000 sample size. But for these congressional races, I mean, you're lucky if you get 600 sample size for a congressional race. It's pretty good. Some of these congressional races only get 500 sample size, and then for the smaller tracking polls that we do, now I'm getting sort of weeds for you, because we do a baseline poll to sort of outline the strategy, sort of gives us sort of who are the targets, what's the best messaging frames for our candidate, what's the best attack frames to use against opponents, so we can see how the world balance out, and then we can figure out who our targets are. And then we do a series of tracking polls as we start to spend money on communicating to see how our opponent is moving, how we're moving, and how we're penetrating with our message for voters we are actually targeting. And so then we can adjust campaign spending and targeting on the fly, so that we can make sure that the voters we need to move, we're moving, or sometimes, our positive's not working as good as we need, and we're going to have to hit our opponent. And in a race against an incumbent, a little secret for our students here, I know we all hate negatives, but negatives work. You typically don't take out an opponent by just saying how great you are. So all that we've sort of figured out from polling, but not at the micro level. It's more at a macro level, sort of across demographics and big regions. So
yes, the students in the audience, this is why you need to learn your statistics. There's real jobs that this is crucial for.
Although David, don't tell them to be pollsters. Don't let your babies grow up to be pollsters. Let them be media consultants.
Your hair will turn gray like Cornell's if you become a pollster. We have a race-specific question about Arizona, and maybe this could go to Sahil. Mr. Kapur, you mentioned that the Republican candidate who is, let's see, McSally, is making the same mistakes that she made in the last election. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? And does it seem like she's doing anything to try to correct that, or?
To the second question, the answer is no. The mistakes that I'm referring to are, number one, there are voters in Arizona. The state is moving away from President Trump, and there are voters in Arizona who want to see something in her that is a little independent minded, who want a reason to vote for her if they're not voting for President Trump. And right now, the surveys say that the president stands to lose that state. So she hasn't really given them that. She has hugged President Trump, metaphorically speaking, very closely and stuck with him, aligned with him, hasn't really separated herself from him in a meaningful way. That's point number one. And the second mistake I'm referring to is that she mishandled the healthcare debate very badly in the 2018 race of hers. And by that, I mean, she misrepresented her position on the Affordable Care Act and specifically the guarantee for pre-existing conditions, which is a 90-10 issue in the country. She repeatedly said she voted to protect pre-existing conditions, that she's all in favor of that, when the reality is she voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act. She voted for a bill back when she was in the House of Representatives in 2017 that would give states waivers from laws that require insurers to, give coverage to everyone at the same price. In other words, not charge someone with pre-existing conditions massive amounts of money, which would essentially price them out of the market. I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but the bottom line is she's doing the same thing again this time around. That issue is massively important. 200,000 people dead in this country because of COVID, millions of people losing or at risk of losing their health coverage because they're losing their jobs and their health coverage is tied to their jobs. So it's a massively salient issue and she still doesn't have a good answer for it, in spite of the fact that she's had a couple of years to rectify that. And that's one of the reasons why the Cook Political Report rates her race as lean Democrat, which is highly unusual, by the way, for a Senate incumbent.
Let's do that segues nicely into maybe a last question, which is about Obamacare. And that was a big issue 2 years ago. Now, since then, it looks increasingly likely that the Supreme Court may basically rule in a way that invalidates Obamacare and eliminates it. So is this an issue that's showing up in the minds of voters, and are Democrats using it, and should they be using it?
Enormously.
Yeah, I'll start off because then I got to jump, but I know Kapoor's probably got a lot on this. But in my polling, yes, we're using it in all of our messaging, sort of testing around the threat that your healthcare and is going to be taken away, and particularly pre-existing conditions. You know what people really don't want taken away? Pre-existing conditions coverage. It is absolutely something that we are weaving into a lot of our messaging, and you will see television commercials, radio ads, digital ads, and mail coming to your mailboxes real soon if you're in battleground states, messaging around this.
Okay, great. Why don't Sahil, why don't you give us a quick take, and then I'm going to wrap up.
Sure. So as someone who arrived in Washington around the time the ACA debate was happening and has covered elections and covered this city pretty much ever since with a focus on healthcare, it is dizzying to think how much the politics have changed. In 2010, in March 2010, after this law was passed, monumental achievement by the Democratic Party, arguably its greatest since Medicare. Democrats were running away from this so fast and so aggressively because they were terrified of the politics of it. Republicans had messaged it well. They said this is going to be a socialist takeover of your healthcare. They said, your life is never going to be the same again. Freedom and freedom will be unwound in this country. Now, all of a sudden, it's Republicans who are running away from their positions and Democrats who are leaning in, even in red states, even in purple states, some of the most endangered Democratic candidates, or I'm sorry, some of the most dangerous Democratic incumbents or candidates in tough places are leaning into the Affordable Care Act. So this issue, the ACA or Obamacare, has turned into a massively beneficial political issue for Democrats after it started off being quite an albatross around their necks in 2010.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I want to thank all of our panelists, and then I'm going to give the last word to Dean Birdsell, who I see. David, if you want to unmute yourself and close us out.
Thanks so much, David, and thanks so much for a great, great panel tonight. Charles Tien, Sahil Kapoor, and Cornell Belcher. It's been a really terrific evening. I want to thank you too, David, for some excellent moderation, terrific management of the questions. Everybody listening tonight, this is the first of a series of events. David mentioned earlier, and you saw the link in chat, to our debate watch that's coming up just 5 nights from now on Tuesday. We'll have debate watches after each one of the presidential debate, adding the 15th and the 22nd, as well as the vice presidential debate on October 2nd. We'll have a program on social media on the evening of October 29th, and we will have 2 post-election panels, but as you just heard, it might be an interesting time after the post-election. So we haven't scheduled those yet. Keep an eye on the feeds here, and we'll be happy to provide you with that information, and hope to see you again soon. Great panel tonight, folks. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a safe evening.